All right, so I want to start the video with as much value as possible. So I'm going to show you exactly what I do to sidechain, and then I'll kind of go into what sidechaining actually like kind of is originally and the different ways you can sidechain. But the way that I do it, I think is the best. I think it sounds the best, and I think you have the most control over the entire sidechain process. I mostly just sidechain for the kick and the snare because I want the kick and the snare to have punch in the mix. So that's mostly what I'm side chaining. So I'm going to route anything that I want to side chain to the kick and the snare to a separate side chain track, right? So I'm going to route this to this track only. And then, you can just name this side chain and color it whatever. And I'm going to add a gain plugin, so Fruity Balance. And then I'm going to create an automation clip. And then we're going to zoom in right here. And I'm mostly wanting to duck the transient section right here, which is this bunch of high frequencies. So, because that's really what has the punch of the kick. But I'm also wanting to kind of have the volume ease in a little bit during these low frequency parts because I don't want the low frequencies from the kick to be clashing with my sub bass and all of my other basses. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Oh, and then you're also going to want to have this on its own track, and you're going to want to put it everywhere that the kick and the snare is going to be. So let's see what it sounds like. All right. So I think that this little section could be shorter. I mean, that's pretty close right there. I'm actually going to scoot this point over a little bit, and you can do that off the grid by holding Alt, and I'm just going to drag it over to about like right there. See what it sounds like. All right, that sounds pretty good. I'm going to move this over one click. And I mean, that sounds pretty good to me, You can basically just mess around with this shape. You're basically just volume shaping at this point. And you just want to find that sweet spot where the kick and the snare punches through the mix. But at the same time, you're not totally noticing the pumping effect from the volume automation. And there's different types of shapes you can mess with. You can kind of, if you're getting like clicks and pops, sometimes you can pull this up a little bit, and that helps. Sometimes if you want more of an exaggerated effect, you can kind of do like a scoop out like this, so you can really get some space for the kick and the snare. I mean, that actually sounds pretty good right there. Sometimes I do a curve the opposite way like this if I feel like the pumping effect is too present. Just messing around with the volume curve until it just sounds right is basically the point I'm trying to make. I mean, that sounds pretty good too, right? That's how I prefer to do it. It's the best way in my opinion. But whenever you're talking about side chaining, that's typically coming from the compression world, So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do kind of a standard sidechain compression so I can show you, and you'll also see why I prefer not to do it that way. So if you wanted to do sidechain compression, let's just go ahead and take it off of the sidechain channel. You would want to route your kick and your snare and basically whatever it is you're wanting to use as the trigger for your sidechain. You want to route that to the channel that you want to be sidechained. So in this case, if I want the bass to be sidechained by the kick, I would route the kick to the bass channel. And you can just do that by clicking this arrow and turning the volume down. Or you can also right click on it, and there's an option to sidechain to this track. basically it's the same thing. It just routes it to that channel and turns the volume down, so that there's no volume going into the mixer channel, but the information is going into the channel, which is what's important. So I want to go ahead and load up a compressor. So we'll just do the fruity limiter because it's really visual. And you want to go over to this compressor side, and then you have this sidechain option, and that's going to show you all of the tracks that are sidechained to this track. So we've got the kick sidechain to this track. If you right click, you can choose that option. And now whenever I play, you're going to see the waveform of the bass, but the signal that's actually getting sent to the compressor is the kick, and I'll show you in just a second what I'm talking about. Okay, so you can see what I'm talking about. You see the waveform of the bass, and every single time the kick hits, it compresses the volume of the bass, but right now it's way over exaggerated and it doesn't sound very good. So what you want to do at this point is adjust this release knob, which is going to basically, this knob tells the compressor how fast to release, obviously, the compression effect. What's a better way to describe that? So the release knob basically is what tells the compressor how quick to ease up on the volume being turned down. Right.
One eternity later.
So the release knob tells the compressor how fast to let go of the compression. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that down. And you can see I have it all the way down, and that has shortened the amount of time that the compressor is actually turned on. Which is great, except for the fact that this is the lowest setting you can go to, and it still is taking too long to release. You see what I mean? There's like a pause, like the kick stops and the volume still isn't coming back to full volume yet. And that's the problem that I have with using sidechain compression in this way. So another way you can sidechain, and this is, some people prefer this because instead of ducking the volume of the entire sound, you can, if you have a dynamic EQ, you can just duck a certain frequency range, right? So I'm going to pull in a dynamic EQ, and this EQ is completely free. I'll leave a link to the download in the description so you can grab it if you like. But this EQ, you can assign any of these parameters to essentially be a compressor, but it only compresses within its designated frequency range, right? So in order to turn the sidechain function on this EQ, you have to click this SC option right here. And since this is a third-party plugin, we're going to have to do some adjustments to the settings in order for this plugin to read the kick signal that is being sidechained to this track, right? So after I recorded this, I realized that my face was in front of the thing that I was describing, so I just wanted to show you real quick what I was talking about. So this INTSC, internal sidechain, you want to switch that to external sidechain. All right, let's get back into it. So the first thing you're going to want to do is go up to where it says INTSC up here and click EXT. And that's basically just saying that this is going to be from an external source outside of the plugin. That's the first step. The second step is to click this gear icon and go to this second tab over here. And then you want to go to this processing tab right here. And down here, you're going to have this thing that says sidechain. So this is going to be just like on the compressor, the fruity limiter. You just right click on this section and it's going to have a list of all of the channels that are sidechained to this track. So we're going to click the kick and go back. And now, since this is the kick and the bass, basically the lowest frequencies are what's going to be clashing. So that's probably the frequencies that we want to duck from the bass so that the kick punches through in the mix, right? So I'm going to go ahead and use a shelf for this. And in order to activate the compression function of this EQ, you need to press this threshold button. And you're just going to go ahead and pull the threshold down a little bit. And whenever I push play, you're going to see. And now you're going to want to adjust the cutoff frequency to, that's just going to take some experimenting to see kind of like where it sits right in the mix. So let's do that. All right, I'm thinking that sounds pretty good frequency-wise, but this attack and ratio, the attack and ratio settings are really important whenever you are doing sidechain compression because, like I said before, that is what's telling the compressor when to kick on and when to turn off, right? So we're wanting this to engage as soon as the kick hits. So we want this attack to be as quick as possible. So I'm just going to pull that down to as low as it can go. And we want to adjust the release setting basically by ear and just see what sounds right. So I'm going to play the track and I'm going to pull down on this release knob until it sounds right to me. Okay, so I turned the release all the way down and it still feels like it's not releasing quick enough for me. This is another reason why I prefer to just do volume automation because with volume automation, you can literally, there's no release knob. You tell the volume when to cut on and off. You have way more control, right? But if you wanted to do this for the kick and the snare, then so you have that ducking the low frequencies for the kick. And then let's say we wanted to route the snare to this. So we would do that. We would right click, sidechain to this track, and you have to open up a new instance of the EQ. You can't sidechain two different things on the same EQ. So you need a separate one. And you can rename these too. So we can rename this one snare sidechain and then rename this one kick sidechain so that we know which one's which. Okay, so once again, we want to turn on this sidechain function, click threshold to turn the compressor function on, and then we want to go and we want to tell FL Studio what we want to sidechain from, which is the snare in this case. And let's just crank the threshold down. And we probably want the frequency. Let's just see what sounds right. Okay. So now we can see that the snare is kind of peaking right around here. So we probably want to go ahead and move the cutoff frequency to right around there and maybe pull back on this cue a little bit. Okay, so let's just do a kind of A-B and see what it sounds like before and after and see if this is even helping at all. So this is it turned off. And this is it with the sidechain on. I mean, all in all, I think it sounds better. So this is just another option for sidechaining that's more frequency specific than just turning down the volume of the entire track, which can be helpful in some cases, right? So another way, which is probably the most common way to sidechain, is actually with sidechain plugins. You've got plugins like Kickstart. You've got several other ones. I'll put their images up here on the video. And basically, those are MIDI triggered volume shapers, but they're triggered by MIDI instead of triggered like this, like these little automation clips. But it's basically the same thing. And that's probably the most common way that I see people using sidechain. This specific type of volume automation sidechaining is kind of specific to FL Studio. I know that you can't really move around automation clips like this in other DAWs. So that's probably why I see mostly MIDI triggered volume shaping plugins whenever I see people doing sidechain, because that's basically the easiest way to do this very way of sidechaining outside of FL Studio. So basically, volume shaping is probably the best way, in my opinion, to do sidechaining.